When to start. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon on short notice. I'm sorry we have to have this, but we wanted at Regional Plan Association and with our partners at the Build Gateway Now Network to set up a briefing to talk about what's happening with the Gateway program. We're here because the money is about to run out for the Gateway program. In fact, this week we understand crews are already demobilizing. Gateway secured a full federal funding agreement in July of 2024, and the project has been underway on time and budget. Over $1 billion has already been spent. And despite the contractual agreements to fund the project, the federal government has suspended the release of its contractually obligated funds since October 1st of last year. So what we're going to do this afternoon is talk about the implications of pausing the construction of the Hudson Tunnel Project and what this will mean for the region. First, kind of from an RPA perspective, and this is from a report we put out in 2023, Commuter Dividend. Look, we take a big view picture of the region. In our region, there are about 1 million people who commute from outside New York City into the city every day. More than 1 in 5 jobs in New York City are held by commuters. For New Jersey, almost 500,000 of those are coming from New Jersey. It's been the lion's share of the growth over the last generation. Those commuters earn about $138,000 a year in wages, well above the average New Jersey wage. And they bring a total of over $60 billion home in wages to their communities. Both sides of the river benefit from this arrangement. New Jersey from the wealth created in New York brought home, and New York, of course, only exists because of its access to the large, diverse, and talented workforce. And the vast majority of these commuters are taking transit, which is vital for the entire regional economy to function. But I think, as everyone knows, our infrastructure is old and crumbling, especially along the Northeast Corridor. And Gateway is the most vital project to fix this. It's a suite of 11 different projects that will modernize and add capacity on the most congested 10-mile section of the Northeast Corridor, making the system more reliable, more resilient, removing the bottlenecks and the delays that commuters currently experience, staving off catastrophe, which would happen if one or both of the existing tunnels needed to be shut down for any length of time, and eventually doubling capacity under the Hudson River and doubling capacity between Midtown Manhattan and Newark, New Jersey, creating the capacity for another generation or more of growth. This just kind of zooming in on the Hudson Tunnel Project, which is the main part of phase 1. The current tunnels, which you see here in the gray, currently run underneath the Hudson River. They were built in 1910. They're 116 years old now. They move each day with the tides, and they were damaged by Superstorm Sandy when they flooded. Amtrak has been working to maintain and repair the tunnels, but basically they can only slow the deterioration. They cannot reverse it until they actually take the tunnels out of service to do major repairs, which would take months. We've estimated that taking one of the tunnels out at a time or losing one would be a 75% reduction in capacity because trains need to run in both directions. You can't just run them all in one way. The resiliency of this project means that the system will be able to withstand shocks to the system, recover more quickly, and kind of prepare for, say, a future superstorms. Just to give you everyone a sense of what's happening, there are 5 active projects underway right now. And again, work has been proceeding on them for several months. As I said earlier, over $1 billion has been spent, and about 1,000 people are working on these sites, supporting another 20,000 jobs in total around the region. But as folks know from reading the newspapers and other things, funding was stopped in October. Essentially, what happened was the U.S. Department of Transportation informed the Gateway Development Commission that they needed to strip out kind of DBE contracting requirements from their contracts GDC complied with that order, but the funding has still not been released for several months. As people probably know, the Gateway Development Commission and New Jersey have filed lawsuits, and New York also, and to try and kind of contractually force the federal government to pay. But that's going to take a long time to work its way through, and it's a complicated process. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to be really doing everything we can to talk about, to educate the public and politicians and our leaders about what's going to happen if construction stops. We did just kind of at RPA an internal analysis trying to estimate what would be the cost of a 6-month delay to this project. So this is only our work. I want to be clear. You have to talk about the escalation costs of inflation by pushing back the project. Financing for existing credit. The program has been able to continue since October because of a $500 million line of credit that the GDC pulled down. Now they're going to have to start paying interest on that. And really, the biggest piece of this is probably long-term payment costs. When you push the entire project 6 months out, the financing of all of the rest of it will be delayed and adds cost to it. When we kind of added up those categories and figured it out, we estimate that 6 months will cost between $720 million to $1.34 billion just from a 6-month delay. And to be clear, when work stops, depending over a certain amount of time, certain parts of it may need to be rebid, so that even if the money is made available, work can't simply restart the next day. Now, in addition to the financial costs of this at RPA, we did an analysis a couple of years ago called a preventable crisis, saying what would happen, what would be the traffic and economic impacts of a partial shutdown. We kind of looked at what would happen if Amtrak had to take out one of the lines and then the other for 4 years, which is what we estimate might be necessary for kind of a full repair. First, understand, and this is one of the key things here, the folks who are at risk of this are not just the 67,000 people who are taking the train during the peak hour or the roughly 120,000 plus who are taking the train on an average day. Everybody who travels around the region, everybody by any mode crossing the Hudson River or literally kind of driving in northern New Jersey or Manhattan is going to feel the effects of this, because what happens is the knock-on effect. When we have a 75% reduction in capacity, we assume that you might still get about 30,000 people able to take a train in. The rest of those commuters are going to be diverted to other forms, whether it's a ferry, a bus, path, decide to drive, or just give up commuting altogether. What that means is that every other mode will be impacted by this too. We figured that about almost 250,000 drivers, nearly half of whom are driving to locations outside of Manhattan, would have longer commutes. More than half of those folks would see their commutes get worse by 30 minutes or more. Frankly, economically, we estimated that it would be about a $16 billion short-term hit to the economy, and property values in northern New Jersey would be reduced because of the lack of access to Manhattan jobs. We estimated the cost of the declining property values to be $22 billion. I think finally, I'll just say before I kind of open this up for questions, and we have some other folks here who can answer them, but one other thing we just want to point out is that there are national implications to what's happening here. Infrastructure projects are not like tariffs. They cannot be kind of raised one day and lowered the next. Rather, this is a 10-year process with very complex pieces, 11 different pieces of Gateway, each of them a mega project in its own right, all fitting together and needing to meet tight deadlines and windows. Disrupting any piece of that will have large implications in terms of disrupting the program. And also this sets really, we think, a dangerous national precedent that if the federal government is able to essentially renege on any commitment that it's made for any kind of financing of an infrastructure project around the country, what does that mean for large-scale infrastructure projects nationwide? How is a company going to bid on a project not having full confidence that the federal government would essentially honor its obligations, not knowing if the financing is really clear? So I went through that quickly, but I wanted to just kind of share our thinking about this, and I'm now going to stop the screen. We have two folks here who I'm going to introduce and ask to give some comments around this. Very lucky to be joined by Rebecca Zack, who is Senior Director of Government and Community Affairs at the Gateway Development Commission, and Mike Hellstrom, Vice President and Eastern Regional Manager at the Laborers International Union of North America, LiUNA. So if I can ask each of you to kind of make some opening comments, and then we'll start to take questions from folks on the chat function. But Rebecca, can you first just kind of give us a sense of what demobilization looks like, what's going to happen in the next 24 hours, week, et cetera, and give folks a better picture of that?
I can, Tom. And first, I just want to thank you and the entire RPA team and the Build Gateway Now Coalition for your kind of unyielding support and still being an incredible partner with us. I don't know if we would have gotten this far without you. So I just want to thank everyone for their time today. What demobilization looks like is, you have Hudson Yards concrete casing, which is funded by a different grant. That will continue. Tunnelly Avenue project is substantially complete. That's great news. The three projects that we're seeing the most impact to is Hudson River ground stabilization in the water, the Palisades tunneling contract, and the Manhattan Tunnel contract. I was just over at the Manhattan Tunnel Manhattan Tunnel site a little while ago, which you're seeing workers leave the site for the first time and not knowing when they might be coming back. You probably had about 15 or 20 guys out there when you usually have 75 on the land side. At block 675 in Hudson River Park, that has wound down. So, very active construction sites with cranes will be coming down and be secured. All of the sites will be safe and secure to make sure that when the pause is lifted, that they will be ready to go, and that nobody is hurt in the meantime. The Palisades contract has the slurry plant will be winding down in the next couple of weeks. That is in Weehawken. That will stop. And then in the river, that work will wind down in a matter of days, if not weeks. So you're seeing hundreds of union laborers walking off the site and not knowing when they're going to be coming back. Our top concern right now is making that it's safe and secure, but hopefully will be revitalized very soon. That is kind of the overview of demobilization right now. How long this lasts, that would change over time, right? You're not going to keep 5 cranes on a site, many, many months from now, probably, but this is what we know now.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. That's very stark. And I got to say, I testified last week at the Gateway Development Commission hearing, and labor came out in force to testify. And I've been to a lot of these kinds of hearings in the past and heard folks talk about the impacts. This one was different. I'd never seen the kind of personal impact and how many people it was going to impact and what a shock to the system essentially it was. I mean, Mike, can you give us a little bit more color and context on that?
Sure. And first of all, I just want to echo the comments of Rebecca and just thank you for putting together this very quick, fast, and important meeting, right? Look, we've been waiting for this project for 20 years, right? And I think you made a statement before, which is really super critical, is that you have the federal government that's really reneging on its side of the deal. And I think if somebody had asked me last week, had I ever experienced this before as a long-term labor leader. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and never before have we experienced that when public work was actually underway, that it would actually be stopped dead in its tracks, right? And so hundreds of our members will be idled immediately starting tomorrow and maybe even starting today. And I think as Rebecca pointed out, it's only a matter of time that the longer that the delay actually happens, more and more of the equipment that's on rent right now will start to disappear just because it's going to find a different home and a different project to go to work at. And remarkably, like the first TBM is on site at the Palisades project, right? It's in pieces. It still needs to be assembled. And the second one is sitting in Germany, waiting to be shipped here for the start of the boring of these tunnels, which was scheduled to start boring around April of this year. It's not going to come here, and they just don't. Right? They can't put it on a ship. We'll unload it and bring it to the site because there'll be nobody at the site to unload it, and there is no purpose, right? And so while some of the work is going to continue, that's going to wind up very quickly, right? And significant progress has been made on both sides of the river that you cannot, you essentially cannot stop some of the progress that's happening right now just because you're so far down the line that if you did, you'd actually have to restart. One of the problems at the Palisades side, and I just want to be clear here, is that because no work will continue at the Palisades side, a lot of the temporary concrete that they had put in place will start to shift. And so the cost overruns are going to start to mount the minute that we start walking away from this site and stop working. So, and the economic impact, just to construction workers as a whole is going to be devastating, right? Because you're going to see more and more of us idled and more of us held out from a project that should have been a project of our lifetime, all because of this administration's desire not to do big, beautiful things in America, right? I would personally just say that this is not an American first agenda. That's really my strong point on this, and we could be doing better. So we're going to stay involved with everything that we got as an organization to make sure that this project gets the funding that it's been promised, and that we build this gateway tunnel because we understand the economic importance, not just to our members, but the region as a whole, as you pointed out earlier.
Yeah.
Can I piggyback on something there? Mike, I want to thank you
Absolutely.
so much for mentioning the TBMs. I just want to say one thing. The TBMs are only for this project. They can't be used anywhere else.
Yeah.
They are completely bespoke to the project. So Mike, I want to thank you for bringing that up.
No resale value there. No
none.
cost or anything. Yeah. No, it's shocking when you think about that. And thanks for going into that, both of you. I saw we got one question, and it's a very good one and a complicated one that there's no simple answer, which is what is the impact of stoppage of Gateway on Penn Station? And obviously, Penn Station and the transformation of Penn Station, that process is moving forward. There are 3 finalists in the bidding process. They're being reviewed now by the team that Amtrak has assembled under Andy Byford's leadership. They're looking at the plans, the financing, and other things. And they want to have shovels in the ground in less than 2 years on this. We've been very supportive of transforming Penn Station, hopefully creating and building a Penn Station that's both better for the existing passengers and has the capacity for the doubling of the transit riders under the Hudson River when Gateway is done. But if Gateway suddenly doesn't happen, it makes no sense really to be putting $6 billion or more into Penn Station. It's just kind of inconceivable that you would be investing in the station when the infrastructure underneath it and connecting to it was literally crumbling. And right now, the project has been moving forward in a kind of rare federal-state partnership. Both New York and New Jersey and New York, there's been a lot of support for transforming Penn Station. We have to see what the details will be out of this process. But I know that the civic community, the business community, the labor community, and others have been very, very supportive. It's just hard for me to imagine how that can continue to move forward when we don't have when the tunnels connecting it to the west are going to be falling apart. And maybe I didn't say this strongly enough before. Amtrak and their teams are doing everything they can to shore up those tunnels. I don't know about you guys. I've ridden in them in the special viewing cars with the windows and the floodlights, and you see the cracks in the sidewall. You see the puddles of water, between the train tracks. You see just how deteriorated those tunnels are, and there's no way they can last much longer for another generation or more without a major reconstruction, which will again be enormously disruptive, and just not something that the economy. I mean, when we measured the economic impact of closing one of the tunnels and doing those repairs, you could see it in Virginia and in Maine. You could actually measure the lost jobs and tax revenues stretching up and down. Here's another question we have for Rebecca. Are there going to be regular briefings or communication channels established specifically for the affected contractors as this legal and funding situation evolves?
I'll say this, and thank you for the question. I know that there's constant communication with the contractors right now, because there's a lot to figure out. And these are not easy sites to just button up and you flip the switch and everyone goes home. It's not like leaving an office. So I know that there is an enormous amount of conversation that has been already been going on and will continue to go on. How that looks over time, I think, is a little bit of TBD. But I know that between the Gateway Development Commission and our partners, that we are trying to communicate and are with the contractors as much as possible and answer whatever questions they have. There's things that it's like, when will this end? No one knows. So it leaves so much uncertainty out there when the ground feels like it's shifting beneath your feet every hour. It changes. It's difficult to know like what the next day is going to bring. But I think at the core of it, we're communicating as often, as much as we need to make sure that we're doing this as safely and soundly as we need to.
Great. Thanks. Another question we just got, any of you want to jump in, or I can try and handle this, or what are the impacts on other states further out, like Connecticut or Pennsylvania and others? And again, it's a great question. And maybe the focus sometimes on this is the New York, New Jersey relationship. But of course, this is the weakest link in the entire Northeast corridor and the Boston to Washington corridor. I mean, Amtrak, as folks may not know, Amtrak has higher ridership today than it did pre-COVID. And has really been on, as they've been improving their services, improving the new Acela trains and other things. And demand on Amtrak has been very high. And the majority of travel between New York and Washington in particular is now based on Amtrak rather than flying. Well, that route is going to they will not be able to add capacity. And everybody is suffering today from the disruptions and delays that happen on the Northeast corridor, most of which are happening in this one piece of the entire corridor. This is where most of the delays occur. And so there will be disruptions and economic disruptions that happen up and down the corridor. And so folks, business commuters and people in Pennsylvania, in Delaware, up in Connecticut and into Massachusetts, all of them will suffer. I'd also just say, one of the things we focus on at RPA here is that it's a regional housing market. It's not just New York City and the 5 boroughs or New York and New Jersey, it's the entire region. And of course, as it becomes harder to commute across from New Jersey, what that will do is create more upward price pressure on housing markets in other suburbs that will have to pick up some of that slack. And so in Nassau County, Westchester, Fairfield County, we would anticipate seeing some of that pressure. And what that means is people are paying more for housing, which means that they have less income, disposable income, and people are suffering, and they have fewer options of where they're going to live. Okay, another question we're getting is, what are the other funding options, and are there any? And I guess, Rebecca, I'd ask you, does GDC have any other kind of options? And maybe, I assume long-term the answer is no, but maybe in the short term, are there any ways to stop that?
Well, I think we've exhausted that, right? The funding pause started in October, and there was a line of credit that we used all this time. So we haven't had funding from the federal government since October 1st. And we managed to kind of get to the point that we're at right now. So that has ended. We have, what Mike mentioned before is that we have a contract with the federal government. These are not things that you walk away from, and hence lawsuits. So the short answer is no, we've spent it. And then what funds are going to need to be used to wrap up what is currently going on and to make sure that the sites are buttoned up.
Yeah. I'll just add to that I know the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is also going to be making a contribution to this as part of the local match for the federal funding. And I've heard some people talk about whether or not that money could be moved forward to try as more of a stopgap measure. I think one of the concerns that's been articulated to me is, if it's not solving the problem, essentially it's kind of giving more leverage to the federal government. And if it's not solving a problem, it'd be dangerous, frankly, to kind of throw more money after the project when again, the tunnel boring machines may be abandoned in any case.
It's a $16 billion project. So,
yeah.
There's no quick way to fund that.
Yeah, I would say you're essentially right. Kicking the can, and The federal government has an obligation here, and that let's just be clear about where the obligation lies. It lies on the federal government to release funds that Congress already appropriated towards this project, right? And so, I could understand, right, just as a commuter, as a labor leader, as a citizen of the region, that if we were still in the planning stages having this debate, fine. But once we got to a place where we all signed contracts and we executed our arrangement to fund this project, in a bi-state process with the federal government being a partner, and now the federal government reneging on its side, that's the problem, is that the federal government just has to do what the federal government said it was going to do. And I think like you do, that is this the beginning of a bigger catastrophic problem in America, that more and more infrastructure projects get toyed around like this across the country because this administration just chooses to do exactly what it wants to do.
Yeah. We've gotten a question about what we've done to communicate with the White House, and I'll say the Build Gateway Now Coalition, Bloomberg and others covered it yesterday. We sent a letter to the White House signed by 22 labor and business organizations. And frankly, if anyone listening to this would like to see that letter and sign on, reach out to us and we'd be happy to collect more. But Mike, again, labor, a lot of this, you guys have those channels of communication. Are there other things that labor is or can be doing to try and communicate this?
I mean, labor has been involved in every conversation that the White House has chosen to have with interested parties here, and it's just an unreliable form of communication, right? It's not something that we're relying upon, with the administration saying we're going to think about it. Well, to your point, thinking about it could have catastrophic implications to each and every one of us. And the fact that 20 or 25% of the GDP could be impacted by a failure of these tunnels. I'm going to use words I normally don't use. It's unconscionable to even think that we would be sitting here having this debate amongst ourselves, trying to figure out how we just get one person to release funds that they're obligated to release.
Yeah. We got a comment in here that I agree with. So I'm going to say your slide on the national implications is extremely important for anyone who might be thinking this will all work out or Gateway isn't my top concern. Please reiterate the chilling precedent this could have on any future project that is federally funded and fully permitted. This is this is something that we want to try and stress. And candidly, I don't know whether the National Governors Association is paying attention to this or business groups around the country, but they ought to be, because even if this doesn't happen again, we think it will add cost to future projects as folks bidding on that work have to add in what's the risk factor of the federal government.
I will give you a sense of what this does to delay this project without particulars. But so the project, for the actual Trans-Hudson Tunnel, right, that runs under the Hudson River, has already been through some pre-RFP process, right? And so a particular contractor has kind of been cited and selected, and maybe have been offered a potential letter of intent, which cannot be executed because nobody knows if anybody will have any money to build this project.
Yeah.
And so if you start thinking about it that way, and look, contractors want to do the work, they're skilled, right? They're trained, they have the capacity to do the work. But if they go and land different work in different locales, we may lose qualified contractors to be able to do this work at this particular time, which could have even greater implications in getting this project done on time and on budget. And that's where we were at right now. And that's another factor of this project, that, as Rebecca said, we were on time and on budget. We had no delays as far as meeting milestones in this project. And here we are going to have to scuttle it starting tomorrow.
Yeah. As I kind of quip, sometimes people, have complaints sometimes about mega projects, but nobody thinks they should cost more or take longer.
Sure, exactly.
So I'm going to close here because we're at
Well,
time.
can I say, Tom, can I say one thing before you do
Yeah.
that? I want to make one point here on a smaller scale. I am currently sitting in the Community Engagement Center on 9th Avenue between 25th and 26th Street. This is a space that we thoughtfully designed to be a community center. It isn't just like where you come in and get a flyer. We've had school children here. We've reached out to organizations all throughout New York City to learn about this once in a generational project. This is going to close. And this is a direct community benefit. I know there's no construction happening, but this is a space that we're using to be an active space that isn't just about like, hey, what's that noise? It's like, hey, how can I learn about one of the most complex, interesting projects that are happening in the world? And this is going to close. So I just want to there's so many layers to this. And I just want to make this point. Where I'm sitting right now will not be open after tomorrow. So I'll let you close. And I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Rebecca. Because I think that those, we talk about the big scale, but it transcends everything. And I guess I'll close with a kind of look. There are over 200 people on this Zoom, which is amazing since we set it up 2 days ago. Everybody has a role to play here. Reach out to your members of Congress, your senators, write letters. That kind of pressure matters. It works. We've seen it. This is how we mobilize. Go to our website, look up the project, circulate on social media. Let's get the message out there because more people need to know about this. They need to be concerned. They need to be outraged, frankly, at what's happening. Because if this project shuts down, it's not going to be able to turn on again quickly. And it's going to cost a lot more, take a lot longer, much more likely to have major disruptions on the Northeast Corridor. And all of that is preventable and unnecessary. So again, thank you, Rebecca and Mike, for being here. I want to thank my team who are amazing, who put this whole thing together. Josh and Sam and Kate and Zoe and people, you're all just fantastic. Ian, and thank everybody who joined us today on short notice. Let's do everything we can. Let's leave it all on the table, man. We're going to do it all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.